All right. All right. So I want us to get our bearings as to where we were um, from Friday. We had learned that um, if a person had paid for a more expensive kind of meat because of a higher standard of kashrus and was given a lower let's say cost of meat because of the fact it's the exact same kind of meat, but it has a lower, let's say, hechsher on it. So therefore, it's, let's say, non-glot. Therefore, it's less expensive. So then the Shulchan Aruch says you're not entitled to a refund if you've already consumed the product. And that was problematic. He says, V'lichora hu tamua. He says, Ma'od ki lefiza nimtza chote niskar biglal shemocher lahem davar isr yekabel kesef shel motzar kasher. He says, if I sold something that was less kosher and therefore cost less money, I'm actually profiting off the fact that I made this error. So it doesn't seem to be fair. So he says, V'harav pri chadash amad b'kush yazu. So the pri chadash acknowledges this question. Piresh is divrei maran shekasa v'lo yachzur lehem klum. He says, and therefore he explains that the Shulchan Aruch, when he says that the buyer is not entitled to a refund at all, is shadiber ba'ofan shaha'isr ve'heter hem nimkarim ba'oto ha'machir. Is talking about where the two types are sold at the exact same price. In other words, there is no price differential between the more kosher and the less kosher. Kamo gevinos shel goyim sha'asur midarabanan ugevinos Yisrael shehem ba'oto ha'machir. Let's say this is just a review from what we did on Friday. Let's say there's two types of cheeses. One is cheeses of Nazareth. No, I'm just kidding. This so it's a one was the brie. So they're both brie. One is the kosher brie and one is a non-kosher brie, but they're both high-end cheeses. So and one is an Isser de Rabbanan because they're both kosher, let's say from an ingredient standpoint, but one was manufactured by a Gentile, one is manufactured by a Jew. So they're both, so it's not an Isser de Rice, it's only an Isser de Rabbanan, right? And then if a Jew buys the non-kosher brie, which was misrepresented as kosher, that's where the Shulchan Aruch says that he's not entitled to a refund because there was no reduced value in what he received, and he did benefit from the cheese. Aval betrefios acheros sheyesh hebdel b'mechirim ben kosher l'treif, but according to the Pri Chadash, if you buy another kind of non-kosher item which is lower in price because of its non-kosher status, pashut hadavar shahamocher chayav lahachzir lo et hatosefet sheshilem yoter b'choshvo shehu kasher. Then obviously, says the Pri Chadash, the buyer is entitled to at least a partial refund, the difference in price between the kosher and the non-kosher. Kevin shu lo yamuchem l'shalom al dvar isser mechir kazeh ad kan devarav, since a person would not have been prepared to pay for that. Now, and that's where we saw the footnote where the Pri Toar argues with the Pri Chadash and basically says that if a guy pays too much money for a commodity, so that's where we talked about this issue of going to Winners, right? And when you go to Winners, sometimes you could try to finagle and get them to take a couple bucks off because there's a loose thread somewhere, right? But al pi halacha, you're not entitled to that. You're either entitled to a full refund, or you're just entitled to what you purchased, but you're not entitled to have that. You can't coerce the seller to knock off the price. So therefore, the seller could just say to him, yes, it's true. I sold you a piece of non-kosher meat by accident, or let's say non-glot by accident, and it's worth, let's say, a buck less per pound. So I sold you 5 pounds. I should have to give you back $5. However, right, give me back the meat and I'll give you a full refund. You can't give me back the meat. I'm sorry, you're not entitled to a refund. So that's a counter argument, but the Pri Chadash certainly sounds more logical than that argument. So well, yeah, I mean, it's a good question, Moish. But the point is that the Pri Chadash's argument is a good argument. Okay, fine. I benefited from the item that I purchased, even though it was a lower standard of kashrus. Okay, so I'm not entitled to a refund, but I should at least get a refund because why should you profit off of something that you represented as glot and then you get the glot price for it when it wasn't glot? That's not fair either. It's a good it's a good question. Yeah, you're right. The Shulchan Aruch was unclear, and that's a kasha. It's a kasha. So v'nira l'damos devarav l'masha kosav v'maseches ksuvas. So it would seem that we could compare what the Pri Chadash is arguing to something that we find in the Gemara in Ksuvas. Ba'adam shesha'al para mechaver lekama chadashim va'acharei shavua hu niftar. The Gemara talks about a case of a guy who borrows a cow from his friend for, let's say, 3 months, but after a week, the cow dies. And then, in the meantime, the borrower passed away. His children come along to examine his estate, see what's left and what did he leave over. And they see this dead ox, thinking that it belonged to their father. I'm sorry. No, it's Ra'u et Hashor v'chashvu shehu shel avihem v'lachein shachatu oto v'achalu oto. So I'm sorry. The cow didn't die. The borrower died. Sorry. Okay, the cow is still alive. Guy borrows a cow. After he has it for 3 months. After a week, the borrower passes away. The children come and see what he's left in his estate, and they note that there's this cow in the barn. So they thought it belonged to their father, and they could do with it what they wish. So they decided they will slaughter it and they'll divide the meat. And they consume the meat. And then the owner of the cow comes along and he says, he's able to show them this cow that you slaughtered was my cow. Gemara Amra Sham Shahadinhu Shahiyatomim Lo Mishalmim Lo Et Hamachir Hamalei Shel Hashor Eli Yishalmu Lo Demei Basar Bizol Dahainu Shtei Shlish Me Hamachir Shel Hashor. And the Gemara demonstrates that they pay him for the price of the meat of the cow, not for the price of the living cow. And the price of the meat of the cow is 2/3 the value of the price of the cow. Now, why is that? Even though they benefited from the meat. He says, but had they known that this cow belonged to another person, they never would have slaughtered it. So, and therefore, they pay what they benefited from it, not what the true value of the cow was, which doesn't seem fair. It doesn't seem fair because the owner of the cow now is out of the cow. A cow is $1,000, and let's say the value of the meat from a cow is $700. A living cow is $1,000. The meat from a cow is $700. Therefore, you only generally sell your cow if he can't do any work for you. But this was a work cow. This cow was still productive. But since they didn't know, and even though they benefited from the meat, they only have to pay for what they benefited from, which was the value of the meat. Now, let's take a look. So he says, what's the analogy? So he says in the footnote, Kavanat Rabbeinu, The damot din zelini don didon. The kamoda hatam achar shenoda liyatomim shahashor lo shalaviyim he mishalmim pachot. He says, just like over there, when they discover that the cow did not belong to their father, they pay less. Hu hadin kishekana basar treif b'chashvoshu kasher, the achar shenodalo shu treif hu mishalim pachot. That since when you consumed it, you didn't realize that it was not the glot. So therefore, once you discover what it was, you only have to pay what you benefited from, which was the less than glot meat. Um,
even worse case where the cow was worth something and you're not even getting your value back.
What if you know that movie Ushpizin, where they find what they think is a lemon, and it's really an esrog, and they cut it up and they add it to their salad. Um, it's expensive salad. Remember that scene?
Oh, I didn't know, officer, you can't go 100 down bathrooms. I don't know.
Okay, let's take a look at the Gemara. I think Moshe's question is a well-registered question. Let's take a look at Ksuvas Lamed Dalet Amid Beis, and let's take a look why the halacha is the way that it is. Just give me 1 second. Well, it wasn't a rental; it was a borrow. What we say, Lamed Dalet Amid Beis, right?
Doesn't matter. Don't know that.
Okay, Omar Rava. Hiniach. Oh, don't have it shared on the screen. Okay, let's see. Omar Rava. Hiniach lahen avian para shu'ula. If the father died and left them a borrowed cow, mishtamshim ba kol yamei she'elata. The heirs have a right to continue using the cow for as long as the father borrowed it for. In other words, they don't have to return it immediately. Meita ein chayavin ba'onsa. If the cow died, they are not liable for any mishap that happens to the cow since they did not themselves borrow the cow. Which also, using Moshe's argument, a guy may not want to lend out cows because maybe the guy who's borrowing it will die. I think the answer to that, Moshe, is that people generally don't entertain that possibility because it's such a remote possibility that the guy that's borrowing this thing is going to just drop dead. So I think that's probably the reason. And like Rashi says, the inhu lav shoal and inhu Allah, because they're not the borrowers. Okay. Now, kisvurin shalaviyam hi utvachuha va'achaluha. If they thought it was their father's cow and they went ahead and slaughtered it and ate it, Mishalman demei basar bizol. They only pay the value of the meat, the less expensive value. So like Rashi says, Kol zuza chashvinun be'arba danki hachimrin perak mishames v'ho'or yachziru leba'olim. They have to return the hide to the owner. But Rashi tells us that it's based on currency exchanges. which is not the way that Rav Sharaga presented it to us. But there must be other commentaries that explain it somewhat differently. If there's different ways of calculating um, the value of the animal based on different currencies.
Getting the $700 for the meat is also getting the hide and whatever else they get back. Right?
I'm not sure if that's. So the Ritva disagrees with Rashi, and he says as follows: Elahachi pirusha shemishalman lefi mashanagu v'hainu demei basar bezol ela shahayodim she'ein parazu shalahem chenamrinim perak hashutvin demei kanim bezol kama kama demei amir bezol. Okay, I don't know what that means. Just don't know what that means. But the Sefaria translation, if they thought the cow was their father's and they slaughtered and ate it, they pay only a reduced assessment of the price of the meat. They're required to pay only for the benefit they receive, not the damage they caused the owner. However, if their father left them property as a guarantee for return of the borrowed item, i.e., there was a lien on the father's property during his lifetime, they're obligated to pay the entire sum of the damage. In other words, if there was a lien, when he borrowed it, there was collateral put up. It's to say, I'm putting up, so I'll lend you my cow, but I want to take a piece of property of yours as collateral, and we'll say it's $1,000 piece of property. They have to deliver the entire piece of property. Yeah. So right. So there is a protection. Okay. Yeah. So right. Okay. He says, so in other words, what Rav Sharaga is basically arguing is that I agree with the Pri Chadash that if they benefited, if the value of their benefit was less because the animal that they purchased or the meat that they purchased was not glat, so they should only have to pay for the non-glat price and not for the price of the glat, which they thought that they were getting. He says, Nimtza de lefi divrei ha-pri chadash. So therefore, according to the Pri Chadash, biyirakot shel heter mechira, shanim karim b'shuk pachos miperus shel yivul chutz laaretz u'chedoyme. So he says, let's say the whole shiloh that we were dealing with is a guy ordered a catered meal, and his expectation that he negotiated that the caterer was going to provide him produce, vegetables that were not heter mechira produce, but rather they were oats are based in, or that they were what's called Yavul Nachri or Yavul Chutz La'aretz, that they belonged to an Arab or they came from Cairo or something like that. So Baal Ha'ulam, so the reality is that the produce that uses Heter Mechira is less expensive. There's no transportation costs, you don't have to buy it from Arabs and so forth. So in that situation, Baal Ha'ulam tzarech la'achzir lehem et ha'kesef sheshilmulo yoter mishivoy ha'peirot shenatan lahem. So then, according to this Pri Chadash, it does make sense to require the caterer who misrepresented what he was giving them, the difference in price at least between the Heter Mechira produce and the Yivul Nachri produce. Aval hashach cholek al zeh. The cost of shahamocher lo tzarich lahachzir kesef l'koineh, af al pi shemacher lo davar biyoter mishavyo. but the Shach disagrees. And he holds that you do not have to, the seller does not have to return the difference in price, even though he sold the item for more than it was worth. The Kevin Sheha Isser Hu Rabbanan, Rabbanan Asru et ha'ochel ba'achila avalo l'chayiv mamon b'mekach tos. So, because since this food item was only rabbinically usher, the rabbis only told the person not to eat the item, but they didn't require the seller of that forbidden item to return the money in the event that he sells a rabbinically forbidden item. And therefore, they basically said that you view this item as a completely kosher item, no different from any other kosher item. But it seems a little bit strange, because I don't see where the Shach is actually disagreeing with the Pri Chadash. He's just saying that you view this item as if it was a completely kosher item. But at the same time, fine, so it's kosher. But the guy paid a premium because he thought he was getting something that's above just the basic kosher. So he shouldn't have to pay that added premium. And I don't see where Rav Sharaga derives from the Shach that he's arguing with the Pri Chadash. Va'od hevi hashach shamraya lezemi masha kasav harav hamagid shehevi es haYerushalmi b'shvius shekol davar she'ifsuro mehatorah asur lasos bo schora aval davar she'ifsuro midorabanan muter lasos bo schora. So, and the Shach tries to prove his argument based on what the Magid Mishnah brings from the Gemara Yerushalmi, that if a person is not allowed to do business with a piece of merchandise that is aser midioraisa, but if he wants to buy and sell a commodity that only is an iser derabanan, he's allowed to do that. Bir hashach dahatamu inyan mammon lo gazru chachamim, and the Shach explains, because the rabbis may have forbade an item for consumption, but they never forbade an item for commercial trade. So, in other words, what you see from here is the Chachamim, when they forbid an item for eating, they only forbid its eating. They don't forbid anything else. They don't forbid any they don't place any financial penalty on something that's Asr bin Rabbanan. Va'ayin od b'shut chasam soifer masher kosav bazeh. So, imkein lefi hashach, Baal ha'ulam eino chayav lahachzir shum davar lebal hasimcha, the heter mechira vadei lo garua me'isur derabanan. He says, according to the Shach, then the caterer would not have to return any money to the consumer, because it's number one, it's certainly kosher. It just relies on heter mechira, which is even less than an isur derabanan. It just happens to be that it relies on a certain leniency that not everyone is happy with. So, but he's still unhappy with that. He says, "Va'adayin tzarich bir b'divrei hashach. Madua hakoina chayiv l'shalim mechir malei afal pi shekibel oichel she'aser midarabanan." He says, I still don't understand the Shach. Why should a person have to pay a full price for something that has the stigma of an iser derabanan, which is inherently worth less? Ubir hanasivas b'divrei hashach. Shadafka Adam Shoichel Isser Mehatorah Afilu Bishogek Tzarech Kaparu Tshuva Lahagen Alav Meha Yisurim. So the Nesivus explains the argument of the Shach. He says, when we say that a person who eats something that's Usser, and if it's Usser Min HaTorah, he doesn't have to pay for it, it's because he needs a kapara. He needs an atonement for what he ate to protect him from any kind of affliction that he may incur from having ingested something that the Torah prohibits. Aval misha avar iser derabanan b'shogeg eno tzarich kapara ve'hevi raya lidvarav. If a person unintentionally, this is only if it's unintentional, let's be very clear. If a person unintentionally eats a piece of food that is an iser derabanan, he doesn't need a kapara. There's no korban, and there's no tshuva that's necessary. If I ate accidentally, it's not going to damage my neshama, which is a huge chiddush. In other words, you normally think that if I do something that's in violation of the Chachamim unintentionally, I should still need a kapara? The answer is no. You ate something that's treif, only midirabanan. You ate your butter crusted chicken, right? So, and it was really, really good. Yeah. Yeah. But it's only an Isser derabanan. So you don't need a kapara for that. V'lachein kevin she'achal es ha'oichel ha'aser midirabanan b'shogeg, avi ki'ilu achal ochel kosher. V'lachein chayiv l'shalem mechir shel ochel kosher. He says, and therefore, after you've eaten something that is a rabbinic isser, you don't need any kapara, and it's as if you ate kosher food. No, so therefore you have to pay the price of what that commodity would have cost if it was kosher. And the problem is that I guess it all depends on how you view it. I'm really not happy with the way that Rav Shirag is presenting this, because it's not that when a person heter mechira produce is kosher, okay, but not everyone likes to rely on that heter because of different arguments, right? Just like I don't want to carry in the eruv, even though I'm allowed to carry it, but I want to be machmir, and I'm willing to even pay money in order to be machmir. So why should and the market acknowledges that you're paying additional to be machmir? Why should I have to pay that additional premium? So yeah, but in any event, he's basically saying, because once you ingest the food, no harm, no foul. Even if heter mechira is not good, you still haven't done anything wrong because it's only an issur d'rabbanan at the most. Amnam ein b'sefer Mishpat Shalom shedacha rayosa v'kein das rov haposkim shebissur d'rabbanan afilu b'shogeg tzarich kapara. He says, however, the other svarim hold that you do need a kapara if you ingest an issur d'rabbanan. Ve'al kein lahalacha kevin shenechleku haposkim im bal ha'ulam chayav lo. And therefore, in the case of the caterer who unintentionally or perhaps even intentionally provided heter mechira produce instead of the higher standard or yavul nachri or yavul chutz la'aretz produce that was imported from Jordan, and he said provided heter mechira produce, the caterer can say, I paskin like those poskim who say that I don't have to give you any refund. I'm very unhappy with this. He made more money.
It's not about the rice of the Rabbanon. Ordered this, and you gave me this. There's a differential price. Just give me the differential. This has nothing to do with, I don't, business. This is just business.
Contracts.
You made a deal. You gave me something else.
Yeah. So take a look at the final note in Osei. Yesh la'ayin dekana mocher issa d'rabbanan b'mezid. He says you have to think about this. The caterer, what if the caterer did this intentionally? He intentionally deceived and misrepresented what the consumer was getting. V'lichora hayanira debechai gavna yesh lakonso shelo yehichote niskar. He says it would seem that in that situation you should penalize the caterer because otherwise you're rewarding nefarious behavior. V'ayin lekaman sherabeinu hevi machlokas aposkim bazeh ha'imasha potar hashulchan aruch b'moicher is d'rabbanan hadavka keshosakim b'shogeg afilu b'mezid. And we'll see later on when we go to in the next tshuva or a future tshuva that Rav Shirag is going to discuss this issue. When we say that the seller doesn't have to refund any of the money, is that only when he also unintentionally served the Yisr D'Rabbanan? Or what if he served it intentionally? Does that totally be machlokas asma b'hashach b'bir divrei hashulchan aruch ayin sham v'dov? That's the machlokas between the shach and the sma, and we're going to see that shortly.
Now we're separating between the Mezid and the Shevet.
That's right.
Profit, you made more money, you broke the contract. That's all.
Yeah. So
if you go to a contractor and say, I want my house re-plastered, and the guy leaves big holes in the plaster, it's not exactly
all right, hold on. That's not exactly analogous. A guy said, what basically, you can't, if a guy ordered double paned windows and the contractor only put in single paned windows, so then there's an actual qualitative physical difference between the two, and the contractor has to refund the difference in price. No one's arguing that, okay? But in a situation like this, we're dealing with, first of all, number one, it's a consumable item. It's not something that can be returned or can be exchanged, okay? So it's being consumed. Number two, the nature of the cost of the consumable item is not identifiable physically in the item. It's a religious it's a religious value. And perhaps that plays a role. Let's continue this discussion in the Eretz Hashem tomorrow. It's more